Hello, my name is Vincent Anelli. This is my media presentation for medical ethics. The class number is 208. I did my presentation on Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 6. It's titled Into You Like a Train. So, summary of the episode. In this episode, there are two individuals. One of them is named Bonnie, one of them is named Tom. They were both in a horrific train accident and impaled with a metal pole in their abdomens. As the episode progresses, the surgeons realize that a patient has to be moved off of the pole in order for either patient to be operated on, but moving somebody off the pole would most likely result in a lot of bleeding and potentially death. At the end of the episode, the woman is chosen to be the person that moves, which then ultimately leads to her death. The man, Tom, is saved. So how is this a right versus right situation? In a right versus right situation, neither option is necessarily wrong. So in this episode, the physicians have the option to either move Bonnie, which she's seen here, or Tom, which is seen here. Not moving either one of them could lead to their death. And just because one person is moved does not ensure the life of the other person is going to be saved. So the chances of saving both are pretty slim. So one decision has to be made for who's going to live and who's going to die. The doctors, like I said earlier, ultimately choose that Bonnie is going to be moved off the pole, which that is what I personally agree with, but I'll get into that later. Sorry. It's a little bit difficult with the screen reading. Okay, so backgrounds on the characters. So the woman, Bonnie, she is young, she's in her 20s, and she has plans for her future. She just got engaged, and a lot of the physicians feel pretty sympathetic towards her. She just set a wedding date for her and her fiance. Bonnie is in more critical condition. She's paralyzed from the waist down, and she has severe spinal cord damage. The man, Tom, on the other hand, is a bit older. He's in his early 50s, and he has a peaceful, slow life with his wife. Tom is in better condition. He has steady blood pressure. He has no sensory or motor function loss, and there is limited internal bleeding. So the two main sides. Bonnie, some of the physicians believe that she should be saved. They argue that just because she is paralyzed from the waist down, that she shouldn't have any less consideration of life than someone who was not paralyzed. They also believe that she is younger, and saving her would optimize more years saved of a person. I personally believe that this is a pretty ageist way of thinking, and I don't think that that's morally right to judge somebody's life based off of their age. Tom, on the other hand, was in a lot less critical condition. He had no damage to internal organs or to his spinal cord. He had full sensation in his body. Some argue that he should be saved because he could live a pretty fairly typical life and would have no to little complications. I've already implied it earlier, but my stance is that Tom has the better chance of survival than Bonnie does, and that he should ultimately be chosen to be saved. Deciding to save Bonnie is more risky, and even though she is younger and she has a very emotional case, choosing to save her would not necessarily pay off, in my opinion. I think that it's a little bit too risky to ensure any kind of, it's a little bit too risky, where with Tom, if he was chosen to be saved, he had almost a full success rate. So connecting it to some of the principles that we've learned about in the class, so utilitarianism. Utilitarianism refers to producing the most amount of good in a situation. So my media source does demonstrate this, as both individuals are worked on and operated on, and the attempt to save both of them is there. Ultimately, only one of them was able to be saved, Tom, in this situation. But deciding to move Bonnie off the pole would most likely, as I said, would most likely result in success. And after the physicians realized that only one person could be saved, they chose Tom, which then would ensure the most amount of life saved. So this theory suggests that individuals only have their best interest in mind and will do anything in order to ensure that. The complete opposite is seen in this episode. So both the patients, both Bonnie and Tom, volunteer to sacrifice themselves for the other person. Tom agreed with some of the physicians and said that he is older, he's already lived a very fulfilling life, and that he doesn't want Bonnie's life to be restricted, basically. But then Bonnie, on the other hand, she recognizes that she's not in good physical condition, and that she thinks that if Tom has the greater chance of survival, that he should be saved. So, if anything, the exact opposite is seen in this episode. Natural law. I kind of had two different opinions if this was displayed in the episode. So ultimately, natural law suggests that nature should run its course, and that if that was seen in this episode, then neither patient would be worked on. So this wasn't necessarily seen at first because they both were being operated on. But then later in the episode, I was able to see natural law a little bit, where when after they slid Bonnie off the pole and they began working on both patients, they realized that Bonnie was in way too critical condition and she was losing a lot of blood, so they ultimately called time of death and put their focus on working on Tom. Everybody except Meredith Grey, which she yells, and this is like a quote from the show, "What about her? We can't just abandon her." Dr. Bailey then explains that there's nothing else that could be done to save her, and they need to just put their efforts on saving Tom instead. So we see natural law a little bit at the end when Bonnie is in very severe condition and there's nothing that can be done. So now getting into the ethical principles, this slide is only going to talk about bodily autonomy and then beneficence. So the next slide will have the other two. So bodily autonomy refers to an individual's right to making decisions on their own body for themselves. There are times when someone's bodily autonomy can be overridden, but it's not seen in this episode. At the end of the episode, the decision was made that the woman would be slid off the pole, and this was agreed upon by all parties, both the patients and the physicians. And then with our second principle, this means that physicians must have the intention of helping others with a balance of risk and reward. And in my opinion, this was displayed as, they chose to save Tom and slide Bonnie off the pole. If they slid Tom off the pole and tried to save both, I don't think that this ethical principle would be seen, but overall I do think that it was displayed just by their choice of sliding Bonnie off the pole. All right, and then with our third ethical principle, non-malfeasance, this means that it's supposed to say physician, I'm sorry about that, that a physician must do no harm and refrain from acts that could result in harm. And this principle is seen in the episode as the physicians do everything they can to ensure that the most amount of life is saved. The surgeons did everything that they could to save both patients, but ultimately only Tom was able to survive. And then the last principle, justice for all. So to me, in the perspective of healthcare, justice means ensuring an equal treatment to everybody. And I think that this was seen in the episode. So biases and prejudices were slightly considered in the beginning with the ageist approach, where some of the physicians thought that Bonnie should be saved because she's younger, but ultimately this was not acted upon, and Tom was saved because he was in better condition. All right, and then moving on. So consequentialism. So in this episode of Grey's Anatomy, I do think that this was displayed. So this is when the consequences are the main driving force behind different actions. And for example, they take into account the consequences of moving both people off the pole. So they look at both situations where if Bonnie was moved off the pole versus if Tom was moved off the pole. And at the end, they determined that if Bonnie was slid off the pole, it would result in Tom's life. But if Tom was slid off the pole, then it wouldn't ensure either life to be saved. Virtue takes into account the character of the person, and then in this case, the physician, who's performing the action. And I think that this was slightly seen in the episode. Meredith Grey, who was in her residency, believed that moving the woman off the pole was immoral and that it would lead to her death, and that she can't be forgotten about and she needs to have an equal amount of surviving as Tom would have. But Dr. Bailey explained to her that moving Tom off the pole would be too reckless and it would most likely result in both people dying. So there are various different situations and viewpoints that were seen in this episode, and Meredith Grey, even though she had different views than the other people, she ultimately lacked a lot more experience and was driven by her emotions. And then relativism. So this takes into account different factors such as time, place, culture, and the situation. And I think that this was displayed in the episode. So having two people stuck on a pole and fully impaled is a very odd situation, and I don't think that anybody in this episode has ever dealt with it before. So there are a lot of considerations that need to be taken into account. So this is seen a little bit as when the patients are discussing who should be slid off the pole, and then ultimately resulting in their death. The man thinks that he should be slid off the pole, while the woman believes that she should be slid off the pole because she's in more critical condition. Both patients understand that this situation is not clear-cut and that it's very situation dependent, and they both are understanding of that. So my reflection, and then on both this episode and also the course, I think that a lot was learned from this project and from this episode in general. Situations like these would require a lot of thinking and a lot of interpretation of the situation. So going through this course, I've learned a lot about different ethical principles and approaches, and I think that, you know, every situation is very much a toss-up, and especially something that is as out there as this situation is. I think the decision that was made, which was saving Tom, was the most ethical decision, and I felt like this because it ensured basically one life being saved. I think that if they were to slide Bonnie off the pole, that it would be a little bit too risky, and going into a surgery with both patients in critical condition rather than just one is a lot. It's a lot of risk for a lot less reward. And so I'm very happy that I took this class. I think that I learned a great amount from this class, and I really enjoyed going through the different modules. I think it's been very interesting every week to revisit this episode and to go a little bit deeper in depth. And I know that as a future healthcare provider, this is going to be something that I'm going to look back on every day in my practice, really. I think that medical ethics it's just so fascinating, and it's really something that cannot be overlooked.